Mr. Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, in the name and on behalf of Slovak exile organizations and institutions, I have the honor to salute this conference and wish it great success. We Slovaks living abroad are very fortunate in being united in our Slovak World Congress, the supreme representative body of the Slovaks in the free world. We are also fortunate and proud that in a similar way as our Ukrainian brothers, with their great and courageous leader Jaroslav Stetsko, we Slovaks are also being led by a highly respected President Stephen P. Roman, who is not only an outstanding industrialist but also and mainly a great protagonist of all the positive and traditional religious, cultural and political values and endeavors of our nation, and above all an upright and good man. This year we saw the 40th anniversary of Yalta Agreement and the end of the Second World War. Our Slovak World Congress issued a declaration in which it pointed out that within a few short years the Soviet Union flagrantly violated all its obligations and commitments under Yalta, the Atlantic Charter, the United Nations Charter, and later also under the final act of Helsinki Conference. The Soviets brutally subjugated all the nations between the Baltic, Black and Adriatic seas, forced on them totalitarian regimes against their will, and by the use of military power they suppressed all their attempts to rid themselves of this oppression. This year also saw the 1100th anniversary of the death of the first Archbishop of our Slovak ancestors, Saint Methodius, the younger brother of Saint Cyril, the inventor of the Slavonic script and translator of the Bible. Yet the communist regime of Prague did not allow the Slovaks freely to commemorate their patron saints, who, together with Saint Benedict, are patrons of the whole of Europe, thus emphasizing the imperative postulate of European unity. In their own country, the Slovaks are being jailed for receiving religious literature from abroad. Their priests are denied state permission to perform their pastoral duties. Slovak culture, cultural life, is spiritually impoverished and stunted. Schools and cultural institutions became only vehicles of atheist and communist propaganda. The Slovak Federal Republic is in reality only a parody of genuine statehood and national sovereignty in a similar way as the Ukrainian Federal Republic. But the Slovak World Congress is leading the Slovaks in their relentless struggle for freedom, democracy and political sovereignty as a nation. The rest will be.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brzezinski. And now for Ukraine, I would like to ask Professor Birovsky, please.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. President, with the approaching collapse of the Nazi war machine, the Ukrainians had to continue their fight against the invading Soviet-Russian armies. By the initiative of the Organization of Ukrainian Nationalists, the Ukrainian Insurgent Army was organized and the Ukrainian Supreme Liberation Council set up as a form of underground government to give more striking power to the struggle. The struggle continued on a grand scale until 1953, and then it was reorganized to become more effective in changing conditions to resist the Soviet onslaught more effectively. The resistance was so strong that the Soviets had to negotiate a special agreement with Red Czechoslovakia and Red Poland to suppress the Ukrainian insurgent army. In order to weaken the resistance, the Soviets applied mass terror by incarceration, deportation, and direct liquidation of the resistant fighters without trial. Then, in 1952 and 1953, the members of the aoun and UPA, Ukrainian insurgent army, headed massive revolts in the Soviet concentration camps in result of which many camps had to be dissolved. Meanwhile, in Ukraine, the resistance movement was resumed in the 1960s by the so-called Шестидесятники, and in 1970s by the so-called Семидесятники, very much in the tradition of the struggle during and immediately after the Second World War. The resistance demanded the right of Ukrainian language to develop, the right to worship accordingly, the right to secede from the Soviet Union. The struggle continues until today by being made evident through even the Soviet press itself, which currently reports an arrest and executions of the Ukrainian patriots in the tradition of the struggle for many, many decades. Currently, the Soviets unfolded a horrible persecution of the Ukrainian church, the moral foundation of the Ukrainian national self-assertion. The currently published Chronicle of the Ukrainian Catholic Church, prepared in the USSR by the underground activists, affirms and confirms that the mad Russian anti-religious drive is getting madder. After the Second World War, hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians immigrated to the West to avoid the persecution and extermination by the Russians. They initiated in the West an enlightenment campaign to show the world that the real threat to freedom is in fact Russian imperialism, which is using communism as a smokescreen. Slowly, the Western political leaders and public opinion began to accept and comprehend that point of view, that Russian imperialists try to dominate the world and that they are a real threat. Communism as an ideology is presently bankrupt and unable to spread with an active support of the Russian imperialists in the Kremlin. And that point of view is slowly accepted by the Western opinion. The Ukrainian patriotic activists in all countries of their settlements in England, other Western European lands, in the USA, Canada, Argentina, and so on, organize their several representations like UCCA in the USA, the Association of Ukrainians in Great Britain, Committee of Ukrainians in Canada, and so on. Furthermore, they joined together in establishing the World Congress of Free Ukrainians, and also through participation in the ABN, EFC, WACL, and similar organizations, the Ukrainians continue to unfold their anti-Soviet activities in order to achieve the success. And they really achieved success, gaining the admittance to the White House, to the Capitol Hill, to the British Parliament. In order to counteract the Ukrainian political activities and their successes, the Soviets, by means of KGB apparatus, unfolded a massive smear campaign against the Ukrainian independence struggle. It is done by lie and distortion tactics, trying to connect those Ukrainian activists with war crimes, anti-Semitism, and so on. It is only a pity that through the KGB machinations and intrigues, even the Office of Special Investigation in USA and the Desha Committee in Canada were taken by the Soviets for a ride to believe in all those distortions and smears. The central organizations and representations of the Ukrainians in the free world undertook massive activity to expose Russian lies and distortion drive, in defense of the good name of the Ukrainian independence struggle.
Thank you very much, Professor Hirovsky. And I'm sorry again, I keep suffering omissions. May I ask Mr. Prislak from ABN Montreal to tell us about things in that part of Canada.
With your permission, Mr. Chairman, I will present my short report in French because I come from French-speaking Montréal, Canada. La section de l'ABN de Montréal existe depuis 35 ans. Au début, très actif parce que de nombreux immigrants avaient été impliqués dans la résistance anticommuniste. Maintenant, ce n'est pas plus aussi facile d'être militant parce qu'ici, dans le monde libre, il n'est pas à la mode, semble-t-il, de se montrer anticommuniste. L'État semble préférer d'entretenir de bonnes relations avec l'Union soviétique afin de faire des échanges commerciaux et socio-culturels. Les anciens militants, prenant de l'âge, nous quittent pour un monde meilleur. C'est difficile de trouver des remplaçants parmi la nouvelle génération éduquée, malheureusement, dans un esprit gauchiste et libéral. La dernière assemblée générale de la section de morale a eu lieu le 22 octobre 1983. À cette assemblée ont pris part les délégués de 6 nations, à savoir les Croates, Lituaniens, Roumains, Slovaques, Ukrainiens et Vietnamiens. L'Assemblée, depuis ce temps, l'exécutif a tenu 6 réunions. On distribue 25 exemplaires de la banque correspondance. Nos principales activités furent entre autres 1. Dimanche, le 23 octobre 1983, festivité jubilaire du 40e anniversaire de l'existence de l'ABN, avec comme orateur principal le professeur Statue de Toronto, suivi d'un programme artistique par de nombreux groupes ethniques, le tout devant une assistance de plus de 400 personnes. Plusieurs invités d'honneur ont pris la parole pour transmettre un message de solidarité, entre autres les représentants du maire de Montréal, un conseiller municipal de la ville d'Outremont et aussi le président de la Fédération des groupes ethniques du Québec. 2. Chaque année, la Fédération des pays baltes du Québec organise une journée commémorative à l'occasion de la déportation massive en Sibérie en 1941 par le régime d'occupation communiste de Moscou. Le président de la section y a assisté comme invité d'honneur le 13 juin 1984, aussi en 1985. 3. Le président a également participé à chaque année aux fêtes nationales du jour de l'indépendance des Croates, y livrant un mot de salutation. 4. Le 14 octobre 1984, les organisations ukrainiennes du Front de libération à Montréal ont célébré le 25e anniversaire de l'assassinat par l'agent de KGB du chef d'organisation des nationalistes ukrainiens Stepan Bandera. Des membres de l'ABN y ont participé pour marquer leur sympathie. était aussi présente Madame Suzanne Blais-Grenier, ministre du gouvernement fédéral du Canada. 5. Le 5 décembre 1984, le président a prononcé un discours à l'Assemblée organisé par les Vietnamiens à l'occasion de la Journée internationale des droits de l'homme proclamée par les Nations Unies le 10 décembre 1948. Cette assemblée s'est terminée par une manifestation devant le consulat soviétique. 6. À l'occasion d'une caravane de la liberté organisée par les Vietnamiens des États-Unis et du Canada, notre section a préparé une rencontre des Ukrainiens avec les Vietnamiens pour faire signer une pétition par les Ukrainiens. Cette pétition, demandant la libération du Vietnam, fut remise aux Nations Unies. Plus de 200 signatures furent recueillies. Le 18 et 19 mai 1985, au congrès de l'American Conference de l'ABN à New York, 4 jeunes délégués de notre section y prirent une part active et l'un d'entre eux y a fait un rapport détaillé sur les activités de notre section. 8 du 24 au 26 mai 1985, Dr. Bertil Hegman, ancien juge et écrivain de Suède, a séjourné à Montréal. Notre section, en collaboration avec la Société scientifique en l'honneur de Shevchenko, a organisé le 25 mai à l'Université Concordia de Montréal une conférence du Dr. Bertil Hegman. Le titre de la conférence était Russian Soviet Disinformation Strategies in the West. Plus de 200 personnes de différentes communautés culturelles du Québec y assistèrent. Radio-Canada a interviewé le Dr. Hegman et a retransmis cette émission en Ukraine. En terminant ce rapport d'activité, en tant que président de la section de l'ABN à Montréal, permettez-moi, Monsieur le Président, Mesdames et Messieurs, de vous remercier de votre bienveillante attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fischer. I will not try a French translation. Mrs. Stechko tells me that the translation in English will be available to anybody who wants it. Right? That's shortcut number one. Number two, discussions and suggestions for further activities. Please think about these. It is proposed by the Presidium, because we're out of time, that these be brought together at the time that EFC session enters the same discussions and suggestions. So with your permission, that's transferred together. The acceptance of resolutions just before lunch, that entry, that will take place later because, as we earlier said, resolutions will only be composed and finished by 10 o'clock tonight. That leaves me with the last item, elections of ABN governing bodies. Are there any propositions? Yes, please.
Mr. Chairman, in consultation with the representatives of various nationalities, the following suggestion is going to be made by me for governing bodies of the ABN. President, Honorable Yaroslav Stechko. Vice President, representative of the Afghan Mujahideen movement. Chairman of the Bulgarian National Front. Chairman of the Belarusian Liberation Movement. Representative of the World Federation of Free Latvians. President of the Supreme Lithuanian Liberation Council. Chairman of the Romanian Freedom Front. Every member of the national organization belongs to the Central Committee of ABN with one vote. Secretary General will be appointed by the Central Committee. Executive Chairman and Head of the External Affairs Department, Mrs. Slava Stečko. Members of the External Affairs Department, Dr. Kharkevich, Chicago, AFABN, Mrs. Roxana Pater, New York, AFFBN, Dimko Stadev, Bulgaria, Rome, Dr. A. Sugar, Romania, Germany. Then the Scientific and Strategic Research Committee, Dr. Hayek, Turkestan, Dr. Taimur, Afghanistan, Dr. Rameshvili, Georgia, Mr. Glinsky, Belarus. Military Committee, Mr. Habib Bayer, Afghanistan, Dr. B. Crook, former soldier of Ukrainian Insurgent Army, Colonel Kosmovich, Belarus, Colonel Bankovsky, Bulgaria, Mr. Trella, Estonia. Information and Mass Media Committee, Mrs. Paris, Latvia, Mr. Soldatov, Estonia, Ms. Kapustinsky, ABN Correspondence, Mr. Vaitunas, USA. Organizational Committee, Mr. Berko, Slovakia, Mr. Statue of ABN Canada, Mr. Thompson, Latvia. Financial Committee, Mr. Rigoni, Hungary, Chairman. Then Dr. M. Bich, USA, Peter Azulas, Lithuania. The Culture Committee, Mr. Dimitriv, Great Britain, Mr. Wazowski, Slovakia, Mr. Bielinski, Poland. Arbitration Board, Mr. Kairis, Lithuania, Mr. Bajas, Cuba, and Mr. Korsak, Belarus. And then comes Presidium of the Council of Nations. President, Mr. Veli Kajum Khan, President of the National Turkestan Unity Committee. Vice Chairman, Professor Chiravsky, IBN, Ukrainian Liberation Movement, USA, Dr. Dochev, Bulgarian National Front, USA, Secretary General Dr. A. Illich, Croatian Liberation Movement. One vote for each nation with 5 delegates. And then finally, the Youth Committee. Mr. Zenon Koval, Belgium, Ms. Irina Chalupa, USA, Mr. Stefan Lescu, Great Britain, Ms. Larissa Figol, Canada, Mr. Rushtinsky, USA, Major Tran Chow, AFABN, Mr. Juan Clark, AFABN, Lieutenant Dadeb, AFABN, Ms. Irene Kapustinsky, Germany, Mr. Paul Mason, and Mr. Tariq Noor. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Dr. Amicheli, I would like to second the proposal by Professor Chirovsky.
So, thank you very much. So that's proposed, seconded. I can't remember that list. All as it stands. Are there any other proposals? No? Can I have your vote on this proposal, please? Thank you. Anybody against? No? Thank you very much. That is Catholic lunchtime. Can I just refresh my memory? Are we back at 2 o'clock exactly?
Yes, I have one on it.
Just one announcement, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we are going to lunch, I would like to announce that the Ukrainian Youth Association has organized an exhibition of relics of Ukraine independence, and this exhibition will be opened at the today noon time, I mean from 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock. If somebody can go there, will be most cordially invited. And this exhibition will be opened on Friday from, it means today, from 1:30 until 9 o'clock in the evening. Tomorrow from 2 o'clock until 9 o'clock in the evening, and Sunday from 2 o'clock until 6 o'clock in the evening. And I will also remind you that we have a demonstration on Sunday at 2 o'clock in front of Soviet Russian Embassy. We would kindly invite you to organize your people, your flags, your placards, your leaflets, and to be present there with us together. And now we are just joining and you enjoy our lunch.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to start now the European Freedom Council session, and I think at the outset the most appropriate thing for me to do before calling our distinguished representatives from the various countries within Western Europe to give an overview on behalf of myself, and I'll do that now. This overview extends back to the year 1983. You will recall that at the end of 1982 we had another EFC conference, ABN Conference here in London. So this is carrying us back over the past 3 years. In July of 1983 we had the commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the captive nations and the 40th anniversary of the establishment of the ABN. The president of ABN, Mr. Jarosław, and myself gave speeches at these commemorations in the Washington Capitol. On the 25th anniversary of the captive nations in Great Britain and the 40th anniversary of the ABN, I myself accompanied Mr. Jarosław to the installation of a plaque in Bradford Cathedral, which was a moment of particular pride for myself as a former Member of Parliament for the city of Bradford. That took place on the 20th of November, and on the 19th of November, the day before, there had been a commemoration in London. On the 40th anniversary of the ABN, there was another commemoration in Munich on the 5th of November. Madame Ursula Apun-Krohn, MDB, and myself attended. I serve on the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe, and on the 27th of January I delivered a speech at the Parliamentary Assembly in 27th of January 1983, in which I suggested, among other things, that the flags of the subjugated nations be raised during Captive Nations Week. This speech occurred on a motion dealing with the situation of Jews in the Soviet Union. And I said on that occasion, of course the Jews are not alone among racial minorities to suffer in the USSR. The official Russification policy is offensive to Ukrainians, Belarusians, Latvians, Lithuanians and Estonians, among others. At least the Soviet Jews now have a national home in Israel, where they may settle and feel welcome if, and this is the big if, they are lucky enough to get out of the Soviet Union, for which they require the official sponsorship of relatives in Israel. Outside this building, the Parliamentary Assembly building, the Council of Europe in Strasbourg, they apply the flags of the 21 member countries of the Council of Europe. Why do we not, I asked, like the United States, fly the flags of the captive nations of Eastern Europe during Captive Nations Week? On the 29th of September, in the Council of Europe again, I once more made a speech in which I defended the position of the oppressed people of the nations incorporated by force of arms within the Soviet Russian Empire. And I quote, "I argue that the Soviet foreign policy would become more confident if we ignored the pressures within the Soviet bloc. But anyway," I asked, "do we have peace in our continent? The Soviet invasion of the fraternal socialist republics of Hungary in 1956 and of Czechoslovakia in 1968, the Soviet invasion of neutral Afghanistan in 1979, like the Soviet invasion of neutral Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania in 1940, the imposition of martial law in Poland in 1981 with Soviet support, and the suppression 30 years ago this year, I was speaking 1983, by Soviet tanks of the People's Uprising in East Berlin are hardly peaceful actions, any more than were the enforced famine in Ukraine 50 years ago, when millions died, or the deportation of Crimean Tatars, Cossacks, and last but not least, the treatment of ethnic Germans, to which the report refers." Then I organised 73 members of the British Parliament to sign an early day motion which lay upon the order paper of the House of Commons, and it read that this House, wishing to commemorate the 25th anniversary of the designation by President Eisenhower of the United States of America of the third week in July as Captive Nations Week in the United States, and recognizing the common commitment to the principles of freedom, democracy and self-determination of peoples shared by the USA and United Kingdom, urges Her Majesty's Government also to designate officially the third week in July as Captive Nations Week in the UK as a symbol of the British nation's support for the restoration of the right to self-determination, democracy and freedom for the peoples within the Soviet Union and of Eastern Europe behind the Iron Curtain. I made efforts in order to have the Ukrainian language introduced in the service of the BBC, the overseas service, that is, the BBC. However, I regret to inform delegates that until now these efforts were unsuccessful. I received a reply from the Foreign and Commonwealth Office that due to financial difficulties, it is not possible for such a service to be introduced. However, I think we should recognise that the introduction would, at the very least, cost only £100,000. So that must be, I think, a continuing concern of ours, to have such a service instituted in the overseas service of the BBC. I also held several meetings in London on the 20th of January 83, 21st of April 83, and on other occasions, with the purpose of establishing a President's office in London, since the Secretariat of the EFC is in Munich. to organise a British chapter of the EFC and create a parliamentary group for national freedom of the subjugated nations. The Honorary President of the EFC, His Royal Highness Otto von Habsburg, in the European Parliament in 1983, introduced a resolution on the situation behind the Iron Curtain in Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania, calling on the United Nations to recognise the rights of the Baltic states to self-determination and to independence, and demanding a referendum on this issue, condemning the occupation of these states by the Soviet Union, and suggesting to the foreign ministers to submit the issue of the Baltic states to the Decolonisation Subcommittee of the United Nations. His Royal Highness Otto von Habsburg suggested to Mr. Tom Spencer, British MP, to introduce a resolution condemning Soviet Russia for the artificially created famine in Ukraine, which cost Ukraine 7 million lives. This resolution calls to designate the 21st of May as Ukraine Day. It further calls on its president, that is of the European Democratic Group, to transmit this motion for resolution to the Commission and Council of the European Communities, to the Conference of Foreign Ministers meeting in political cooperation, and to the Ambassador to the United Nations of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. Mr. Jaroslav Stetsko visited Ambassador Jean Kirkpatrick in 1983 and her first deputy ambassador in 1984, contesting the representation of Belarus and Ukraine in the United Nations by Moscow puppets. And Mr. Stetsko requested that they should be replaced by the representatives of these respective nations who are leading the liberation movements of their countries. The ABN president also kept in contact with the US chairman of the Olympic Committee over the question of the participation of athletes from the subjugated nations in the Olympic Games. Mr. Stetsko met with myself on many occasions and discussed matters pertaining to the FC with Professor Magnino and, of course, with Mr. Kirkpatrick and Mr. Bertil Hegman. Mr. Stetsko frequently corresponded with the Honorary President, His Royal Highness Otto von Habsburg, and other members of the Presidium. Mr. Bertil Hegman, Director of the Institute for Political Psychological Freedom Campaign, visited Canada and the United States with a lecture tour. He also spoke on several radio stations. Madame Slava Stetsko, besides attending the secretarial activities for the EFC, tried to promote the idea of convening the EFC Youth Conference. Unfortunately, it wasn't possible to carry this idea through. Mrs. Stetsko was also responsible for the preparation of 2 annual EFC meetings in Munich. On the 12th and 13th of May 1983, the ABN and EFC held an enlarged executive board meeting in Munich. The meeting was presided by the EFC chairman, that is myself, and I delivered a speech on the current military position of NATO. The other speakers on that occasion were the Honorary Chairman, His Royal Highness Otto von Habsburg, whose speech was dedicated to the possibilities of EFC cooperation with the European Parliament in light of the present international political situation. ABN President and Honorary Presidium Member of the EFC, Mr. Stetsko, spoke on the analysis of the current military position behind the Iron Curtain. The Honourable Guillermo Kirkpatrick MP analysed the position of the Spanish Peninsula in the context of the European defence system. Professor Magnino from Italy dedicated his attention to the younger generation, and Mr. Bertil Hegman elaborated the whole plan of political warfare department. There were also present at the meeting members of the EFC Council from the United Kingdom, Germany and Spain, and representatives of the subjugated nations Bulgaria, Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Slovakia, Romania and Ukraine. On the 22nd to the 30th of September 1984, there was again an EFC annual meeting in Munich with strong participation of the EFC Presidium and Executive Board members. I suspect that's a typing error. It looks to me like the 29th and 30th of September. As well as national representatives of the subjugated nations, Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty. The meeting was presided by myself. The topics under discussion were the following: necessary reforms for NATO, that was my speech; national liberation processes in the Russian Empire, President Jaroslav Stetsko; the importance of the liberation struggle in the West, Mr. Bertil Hegman; Turkestan's and Afghanistan's importance to European freedom, Dr. Haidt; EFC activities in different European countries. The meeting issued a statement which was sent out to the mass media. Then you might, ladies and gentlemen, just like to know the publications that have been issued on our behalf. All the material from the conference in London in 1982 was published in ABN Correspondence. The book about the London conference appeared in 1985, entitled The West's Strongest Allies. All the speeches from the commemorations in Washington, Munich, London, and Bradford have been published in ABN Correspondence. Do I have your permission, ladies and gentlemen, to sign the report which I have read verbatim as a true record of the proceedings of the last 3 years? Aye. The seconder? Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We have a question and answer session later this afternoon, but I think it might be helpful for the conference if we went straight on to the individual national contributions to the EFC. And in this regard, it is a particular pleasure for me and an honour too to introduce my friend and colleague from the British House of Commons. He needs really no introduction, but formally I suppose I must do so. Stefan Terlecki. Stefan, as you know well, is a historic figure. He is the first generation Ukrainian to be elected to a national parliament in any of the Western democracies. That is correct. And we're so proud and pleased and lucky that it should be the House of Commons that he's chosen, because I'm sure he could have got into any of them. And another good thing in a way about it, I mean, it's a particular point of pride, and I reckon it's something that is perhaps evidence that we're more fair-minded in the UK than is always recognised. He was elected for Cardiff West in 1983 for the constituency of Cardiff West, which I believe has a very small Ukrainian community indeed, maybe almost in single figures. Is that right? None, he says. The single figure is 0. He contested the seat twice before, and he also fought the Euro constituency. He served as a councillor for 27 years for the Conservative Party in Cardiff and in the county of South Glamorgan. He is presently a member of the Select Committee for Welsh Affairs, and of course he's a famous past chairman of Cardiff Football Club, for those of you that follow our national game. The Honourable Stefan Terlecki.
John, President Stetsko, Madam Stetsko, honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, you ain't heard nothing yet. And I am not going to make my maiden speech now or today, so I was told. So how little I have to tell you something about whatever it may be, I will have to keep in suspense until I am told when I shall be allowed to make a speech. Nevertheless, I have been honored and privileged to be elected the chairman of the EFC, and also having got excellent officers elected at the same time to do what is within our power to do for the benefit not just of the EFC, but on behalf of all those little cards which are on the tables now, and I'm looking at them. If I would read them all out, then we'd be having here not only dinner but breakfast also, because there are so many of them, and I respect them, I support them, and I shall go on supporting all those cards and all of you who represent the cards in front of you. I tried to do my best because as a new member of parliament, a backbencher, I've got to keep quiet, I've got to listen, and I've got to watch. But that's not my nature. I don't try to be too forceful or forward, but at the same time, I have been elected representing over 60,000 electorates, and I am in the House of Commons, which I consider to be the matter of parliament, cradle of democracy, which entitles, irrespective of age or height or the length of service, to speak one's mind in what I already have said, cradle of democracy. And up till now, I think I have succeeded of saying things that is dear to my heart, not only as far as my own constituency of Cardiff West is concerned, but also on issues that concerns the world, concerns Europe, and in particular that concerns the oppressed nations behind the Iron Curtains, satellite states, and for that matter, all other nations that are oppressed by Marxism and communism throughout the world. And so I'm trying to do my best to contribute and for your voice to be my voice in the House of Commons and wherever I travel. And over the past 2 years or so, again, I have been very privileged being nominated by my party in the House of Commons to travel far and wide. For example, over the past 2.5 years, I have traveled to Bangkok, to Taiwan, to Hong Kong, to Israel, to Jordan, to Qatar, Persian Gulf, and nearer home, Dublin, so that I and many of my colleagues, when we travel together, have some facts and finding out the relationship between the United Kingdom and all other countries, so that we can consolidate ourselves on issues that are very dear to us, not only in trade, not only in defense, but also on social and political issues. And with my name, Stefan Terlecki, they said, "You are Polish." I said, "I'm not." "You are Russian." I said, "I'm not." "Well, who are you?" I said, "I'm Ukrainian." "Never." I said, "Yes, I am. And what is more, as John already said, I am the first Ukrainian ever to be elected to the British I am honored, not on my own behalf, because if I tell you that when you all are very tightly in your beds asleep 7 days a week, I burn the candles both ends, and I'm sure John does also, because the responsibility and the work that one does in the House of Commons requires work 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. But I am not complaining. I'm only complaining that I could not have been in the House of Commons 15, 20 years earlier. Perhaps by now, the BBC would not only have broadcast to the Ukraine in Ukrainian language, but to all other nations here today in their own respective languages also. As well as having traveled to all the countries I have mentioned, I also have had interviews with the press, international press, as well as the media such as BBC, Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, and to my very, very pleasant surprise, when my father visited me from Siberia last year, he was telling me that I was heard on the radio in my own village. And I thought that was absolutely magnificent, that I have been heard on the British radio, British broadcast, speaking in Ukrainian. And some of the villagers said, he speaks better Ukrainian than we do. Well, I am not so sure, after 42 years of separation from my loved ones and my country, to retain Ukrainian language, I can tell you, for me personally, is as hard as climbing Mount Everest in the ballet shoes and reach the top. It's very hard indeed, but I am trying to do my best. Also, as the chairman of the EFC, I managed during the parliamentary recess, where most of my colleagues, excluding John because he travels and he works very, very hard, and I am telling you this most sincerely. But during the recess, most of my parliamentary colleagues, they whether dig their gardens or cutting the lawns or go to Costa Brava or French Riviera for holidays, I decided to travel in the United Kingdom as the chairman of the EFC, and I visited Leicester, Newcastle, and Bradford branches, speaking at those branches with the support of my officers. I'm honestly very pleased and highly delighted to have such marvelous officers working with me, taking nothing away whatsoever from my predecessors and from the chairman, previous chairman of the EFC. They did excellent work, and I only hope that I will be able to fulfill my predecessor and his officers the aim that we are trying to achieve. And what we're trying to achieve is to spread the gospel, in a way, the apostles' gospel, but with small a, so that the nation, that the people in the United Kingdom and beyond, in all those countries that I have traveled, as I already told you, that they know why we are in the West and not in our respective countries, that they know what our aim is, that they know that Soviet Empire is, without a doubt, an evil empire. How can it be otherwise? The Russian army slaughtering men, women, and children in Afghanistan. Polish solidarity is being contained to the ground in the Ukraine and in all other countries. There is no free speech, free travel, free press, free religion. So, my message would be to Mr. Gorbachev, let his heart smile as loud and as often as and open as his mouth. And when those two will coincide, then I think we can say that our brothers and sisters, our relatives, and all the nations that are now being oppressed by the Soviet regime, one day can breathe and rejoice, and take freedom as much for granted as we do in this country, so that as the empires came and gone, let us hope, through various branches, through the organization of the IBM, through the EFC, we will all see the day alive when our respective nations will be as free as the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Yeah. expected. That was a true tour de force. We've been very lucky to hear it. The next spokesman that I would like to call to give a report is Mrs. Sandor of Scandinavia. Mrs. Sandor here? This is, of course, Deputy Higman's report. But I regret to have to inform you that he was called back urgently to Sweden because of the grave illness of his mother.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am honored to read a report by Bertil Hegman, member of the Swedish Authors Association in Sweden, and he is director in the Institute of Political Psychological Freedom Company. This report is covering the period from the conference in Munich 1984 to London today. Since the autumn 1984, the Institute for Political Psychological Freedom Company, APPCS, publishes a quality newsletter, The Political Warfare Front, which is distributed to the members of the Institute and a number of contacts worldwide. Some of the material in the newsletter has been reprinted in ABN Correspondence, and the report of the Freedom Fighter Conference in Jamba, Angola, was picked up by the West German newsletter ABC Berichte, number 73, October 1st, 1985. A copy of the German article is attached to this report as an appendix. In May-June 1985, the director visited Canada and the United States on a lecture tour on invitation of ABN Canada and its chairman Orest Stetziv and the American Friends of ABN. Mr. Stetziv and his colleagues has prepared an excellent tour with great hospitality shown throughout the journey, both in Canada and the United States. Starting in Toronto at the Canadian Forest Staff School, a lecture was given on Soviet, Russian and communist political warfare against the West. I also visited the Ukrainian Cultural Center in Toronto. On May 21st, I took part in the Cheriton Show, a local TV talk show on international affairs with Colonel Brian MacDonald, director of the Canadian Institute of Strategic Studies. Later the same day, an interview was given at MTV Channel 47, a local ethnic TV station. At both events, I had the opportunity to present EFC, its work and views. The tour continued with a visit to Ottawa with a TV interview on the Ukrainian kaleidoscope at Ottawa Cable TV, Cable 12. In the evening of the 33rd of May, a speech was given at the Ukrainian Cultural Center in Ottawa. So the Canadian League for the Liberation of Ukraine had invited to a public lecture in Montreal on Russian Soviet disinformation strategies in the West at the Concordia University on May 25th. The lecture was well attended with a number of interesting questions afterwards. The next stopover was Winnipeg. There I had the opportunity to appear on TV in local ethnic program and later speak to an audience at the Ukrainian Institute in Winnipeg. The day after, I saw the monument erected to commemorate the 15th anniversary of the famine genocide in Ukraine 1932-33. After a radio interview, I left for the Canadian West. My visit coincided with a visit to the city of Edmond by Vitaly Voronnikov, premier of the Russian SFSR. On May 29, I appeared on a radio talk show, Talk Back on CJCA, broadcasted by Ron Collister. After visiting the newspaper Edmonton Sun, I took part in a press conference of the Edmonton Freedom Council to protest the Voronnikov visit to Edmonton. In the evening, I spoke on a forward strategy of